to lock a pig in a tiny container for months? And my answer is yes. My answers are consistent. It is your confused questioning that is inconsistent.
Also, I'm just sort of wondering why you didn't go to, would you sentence someone to go to jail? Because that's locking a human in a crate. Locking a human in a crate, and if it's a federal facility, then oftentimes locking a human in a large, complicated series of crates where they're going to encounter people.
That's directly analogous.
However, if we live in a society and we have prisons, then and we support this idea, then clearly there are circumstances under which causing the harm of locking a human being in a box with bars is permitted.
So, for example, you could view Albert. You could view cats and dogs as roughly equivalent for this example. And if the dog pooped inside, would you lock him up in a crate for months? No. But if the dog was rabid and demonstrated a danger to people, I would definitely lock him in a crate until such time as we could actually put the dog down. Mm-hmm. So you have to take. You're talking about, is there harm by locking something in a cage? Yes, and that's true for pigs, cats, dogs, and human beings. The separate question is there sufficient justification to lock something in a cage? If the cat is violent and vicious, and you have to, or the dog is violent and vicious, then maybe you have sufficient justification to put that cat or dog in a cage, the same as you would the human. This is the problem when you start making these moral quandaries and dilemmas. They have to be directly analogous, otherwise you are committing the fallacy by analogy, that you have two things that are not equivalent. There's equivocation fallacy that you're trying to make equivalent. So lock a cat in a box, is it harmful? Yes. But that doesn't mean that there's not a good reason for it. It just means that not pooping in the litter box isn't sufficient justification for putting it in the box. Does that make sense? Where's my cognitive dissonance? Where's my failure to reason?
Right.
Checkmate.
This is where we got off. You were trying to justify your action of eating bacon.
No, I'm not. No, I'm not. I know. At no point did I try to justify why I eat bacon. We haven't even had a conversation about whether or not it's moral to eat bacon.
I asked you
because eating bacon isn't equivalent to murdering an animal or killing an animal, whichever.
This is the thing. You think you've caught me in cognitive dissonance, and at every point I've shown you that that is not the case, that it is your sloppy thinking about asking these questions that makes it appear that.
Albert, there's a fundamental problem in this series of questions, which is cognitive dissonance is about coming to two... Albert, let me finish this, because we're on, you know, floor 13 of a building with a bad foundation, and we need to go back down for a second. The fundamental problem with this series of questions about trying to get to cognitive dissonance is that cognitive dissonance is about holding two contradictory beliefs about a fact claim that are in contradiction. If you're trying to expose a weakness or a poorly thought out moral decision, or something that appears incongruous with a series of values and a method of moral evaluation, you can do that. But that is very different than believing that there is a human-sized bunny rabbit that is invisible and intangible that follows me around and talks to me.
Cognitive dissonance would be simultaneously, or switching back and forth between saying, no, locking the cat up doesn't harm it, and yes, locking the cat up doesn't harm it. That's cognitive dissonance. As soon as you change the subject, the conditions, the surrounding thing, that's no longer cognitive dissonance. Just like I would argue that there's a benefit to trying to reason with an adult, and not particularly a benefit with trying to reason with an infant who can't understand what you're saying. Yet they're both people. Is there any benefit to arguing with people? Yes. Well, what if that person is 6 months old? Well, clearly no. That's not cognitive dissonance. That's a recognition of a distinction between them, just like I recognize the distinction between the reasons why we would put a cat in a box and the reasons why we would eat bacon. You don't seem to know what cognitive dissonance is if this is your trap to show that we're in it.
I would also like to state for the record that there's not really that much benefit trying to reason with a cat. But there's a reason that we call
I
believing
agree.
that there is a door and that there isn't a door simultaneously, or believing that this is wrong and that it's not wrong at the same time as cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
And, oh, I would never hurt my child, and then that person goes home and beats their child. There's a reason that we call that hypocrisy and not cognitive dissonance, and that is because those two things are not the same.
The point that I was trying to make is that sometimes I think we turn off our brain in order to feel comfortable with our actions.
I agree.
And I would,
Yeah. If you've ever seen someone mourn the death of a loved one, denial is one of the first things that happens.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's why I was trying. I think I would never put a cat into a crate. I don't think that that you can argue with a cat either. I don't think that putting a cat in a crate is a good thing. I don't think it would help. I think it would. I agree with both of you that it would cause harm. I think the same thing about a pig. I think that putting a pig into a crate would definitely cause harm.
Me too.
I don't think that we need to eat meat. I don't think we need to be killing innocent animals. You know what I mean? That's why I don't eat meat.
Okay.
I'm sorry with my sloppy thinking. I was just trying to find an example which showed.
This could have been really easy, Albert. This could have been really easy, Albert, because we both agree that occasionally all human beings stop thinking rationally and engage in something irrationally for emotional reasons. That the fact that we all do it is separate from should we do it, and whether or not we should do it is dependent upon the situation. If my grandmother is on her deathbed and asks me, do I think she's going to heaven, I'm going to say no, because she already knows that's what I think. It's an honest answer. It's not particularly comforting. If she is in doubt about whether or not there's an afterlife, is it a bad thing for her to, on her deathbed, rationalize and say, oh, I'm going home to Jesus, I'm going home to... It's doing no real harm at that point. It may be doing harm if you're 12, and this is going to determine how you live the rest of your life. Believing that you're going home to be with Jesus at some point in the future will control the next 70 years of your life or so. Whereas somebody on their deathbed, there's nothing left to do. So the fact that we can all engage in suspending reason for the sake of our own emotions doesn't mean we should, and whether or not we should is dependent on circumstances. If we'd have started there, which I think we agree on, then all that cats and dogs and pigs stuff would have been irrelevant. And none of this, by the way, is a demonstration of cognitive dissonance. It's a demonstration that we are human beings, and that we make mistakes, and that I will happily try to correct mistakes when they've been exposed. But if I find a flaw in, if you construct a syllogism of everything that we discussed, you'd be able to see the fallacies. You'd be able to see the equivocation. You can't always see that in a conversational type of dialogue, which is why shows like this are awesome, occasionally frustrating, but I'm enjoying this call and others.
Yeah, and I would like to say, Albert, the fact that really, I know that you know, it's, even when I watch old episodes, I try and respond to things that callers and that Matt say, but this doesn't demonstrate a level of cognitive dissonance, and it would be better if humans didn't rationalize and come to illogical beliefs. However, we didn't evolve, or whether you believe in creationism, we don't exist in such a way that we can turn off irrationality. And so we have to find some way, if we're going to live in a civil society, of managing that. And I'm happy to use whatever tools, cognitive, that I can on myself to limit and control the influence of irrational tendencies in my mind. Whether that means making myself, allowing myself to believe that something that's unlikely is more likely for a moment so that I feel better, is to me in many cases useful, because feeling negative or panicked or stressed about something doesn't facilitate my ability to evaluate it rationally. So if I take 5 minutes to myself and I think about ponies or rabbits, or I watch a cat video online and I think about how amazing it's going to be that my cat at home, oh, I could definitely take the time and teach it to do a backflip, or whatever it is I find online, that might make me happy, and then I would pet my cat and feel better, and then I would think about the thing that was causing the stress and the irrationality. So it's not about coming to a series of beliefs about what exists in reality and then living one's life by them. It's about managing the irrationality that we all have inside our own heads. And to what started this call, you said you're not sure you're ready to give up your belief net, I think is the phrase that you used. And I would say those are things that you don't need those specific beliefs to do, and those are things that you can do without any specific belief. And so one of the things I want to get to, I mean, you are going to want to respond to this, but one of the things I want to get back to in this call is what started this questioning for you. Has what we've said so far about dealing with the rationality and coming to conclusions for seemingly irrational ideas addressed, I think, the core of what you were getting at? The core of the human behavior you were getting at?
Yeah, yeah, it's in there. I'm still a little confused about and I'm just asking so I don't make this mistake again.
Sure.
What you said that's not cognitive dissonance. What? So if I'm eating bacon because it tastes good, but yet I know that I paid somebody to torture and kill this animal, what is that called? Just wondering.
I think Jamie referenced it as hypocrisy earlier.
Yeah.
Cognitive dissonance is basically, I believe this and I don't believe this. And the illusion is that we believe it simultaneously. Jamie and I are in agreement that we don't actually believe it simultaneously, that the process of rationalization allows us to switch back and forth.
Remarks. Yeah, thank you, Tony. Can you please, thank you. Whether that protection covers other coronaviruses is impossible to say at this point. It's an item for immediate research. Yeah. But again, important to recognize when we say recover patients and when patients are discharged from hospital, they're swabbed before discharge when they are tested negative, and it's really important that we don't start creating stigma around discharged patients. When patients are discharged from hospital, they're considered to be fully recovered, and as such should be welcomed back into their communities with open arms. They're survivors, and they should be seen and welcomed and celebrated as such. Thank you very much. Dr. Tedros has left his office in Kinshasa. So.
Another 97 people in China have been killed by the coronavirus. We know that over 44,000 people have been infected in China, and the death toll has passed 1,100. He's the Director General of the World Health Organization.
The number of newly confirmed cases reported from China has stabilized over the past week. But that must be interpreted with extreme caution. This outbreak could still go in any direction.
Well, outside of China, 25 other countries, all marked in red here, have confirmed cases, and there have been 2 confirmed deaths. You'll notice, though, no cases in South America, no cases in Africa. It's also worth noting that the daily rate of infection is falling by almost 50% since last week. On that issue, here's the BBC's Stephen McDonnell in Beijing.
We don't want to get ahead of ourselves because I mean, if people became complacent, all of a sudden it could take off again. But for the moment, at least there is some sort of a suggestion that we might be turning the road. But until we're seeing, for example, tens of thousands of people in the recovered column, well, then people will start to feel a bit better then.
I've been noticed that too, that there aren't any reported cases in Africa. Now, are they not reporting these cases in order to let the outbreak in Africa spread and get out of hand? Or are there really actually no one infected in Africa? When you think about over the past 20, 30 years, as much as China has been investing in Africa and setting up businesses and corporations in Africa, trying to export its citizens to Africa to basically colonize certain areas, you would have to imagine that someone from China had to visit Africa within the last month or two. So once again, like, are there really no cases in Africa? Or are they hiding this thing until it gets out of hand? Maybe Africans are immune to this shit. Who knows? It could be the high level of melanin, which co-opts the virus. Well, they say there's no cases in South America as well.
The Mobile World Congress event in Barcelona, a vast industry event, has been cancelled because of the coronavirus. Also, the Chinese Grand Prix, which was due to take place in Shanghai in April, well, that's been postponed. Formula One says the decision's been made to ensure the health and safety of drivers, staff and fans. Also, in Geneva, scientists have been gathering at the World Health Organization to discuss ways to combat this virus. Here's the analysis of one of them.
The measures that China has taken to really contain the outbreak might work. And so it might end up as an outbreak that, of course, unfortunately has killed over 1,000 people, but can still be controlled and contained. On the other hand, we don't know. It might have already spread outside to many countries. And so this may become still a global outbreak or even a pandemic.
Let's bring in the BBC's Imogen Foulkes, who's been covering these discussions in Switzerland. Imogen, what are the goals of these talks? What's the hope of the WHO by bringing all these scientists together?
Well, they went into these 2 days saying that they wanted to draft a kind of master plan aimed at containing and, in the end, stopping.
In Switzerland. Imogen, what are the goals of these?
So they gave a name to this coronavirus. It's called COVID-19. 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 So it stands for coronavirus something. And 2019 was, when it was first discovered. So coronavirus 2019 is basically what the name stands for, COVID-19. Don't catch that COVID.
What's the hope of the WHO by bringing all these scientists together?
Well, they went into these 2 days saying that they wanted to draft a kind of master plan aimed at containing and, in the end, stopping this virus. To interact, though, at the same time preparing countries for its arrival. And at the end of those 2 days, just this evening, in fact, they highlighted various things that they want to do. And almost top of the list is getting easy-to-use diagnostic kits to countries with weaker health infrastructure. That bears into the clip you just played there, that there are no cases, registered cases, in Africa. But as the WHO expert said there, there are cases, but there's been no chance to really diagnose them. So that's one of the things that WHO wants to do. Also, look at treatments. There's no specific treatment for this virus yet. And in the long term, look at vaccines. So they got a plan for all of that. And I think boosted a bit by this news that the cases, daily new cases in China are falling, a hint of stabilisation, but nobody is getting complacent at the WHO in Geneva.
But Imogen, what's the relationship between the WHO and the individual countries caught up in this? Because presumably the WHO can't mandate a particular response from a particular country.
No.
The WHO, World Health Organization.
6 days after the September 11th terrorist attacks, it was President Bush who went to the Islamic Center of Washington, D.C., and proclaimed that Islam is a religion of peace. At the time, the remark was barely a cause for controversy. Instead, it was greeted by most as a call to civility, a note of sanity, a warning to fanatics who might consider taking revenge on some innocent Muslim women shopping for groceries in a headscarf. But now, 9 years later, President Bush is widely accused, in retrospect, of having succumbed to a momentary case of political correctness. Many people now believe that his Islam is peace remark was born either of ignorance.
Howe has awarded Tempur-Pedic #1 in customer satisfaction with retail mattresses. We're ranked highest in comfort, support, value, durability, warranty, and customer.
Everyone was compelled to believe by too much evidence. Actually, this is Francis Collins. I'm sorry. This is
well,
Francis
a friend of mine, Canon Fenton of Oxford, actually, said that if the church validated the Holy Shroud of Turin, he personally would leave the ranks, because if they were doing things like that, he didn't want any part of it.
Right.
I didn't expect when I started off my book tour to be as lucky as I was. Jerry Falwell died in my.
Was it what?
I didn't expect Mother Teresa to come out as an atheist.
Yes.
But reading her letters, which I now have, I can't bring myself to believe any of this. She tells all her confessors, all her superiors. I can't hear a voice. I can't feel a presence, even in the man. The suffering. It gives you a share in the crucifixion. It makes you part of Calvary. You can't beat an argument like that.
Right.
The less you believe it, the more you're an illustration.
Or you prove it's true.
Yeah. Yes, and the struggle, the dark night of the soul is the proof in itself. Yeah. So we just have to realize that these really are non-overlapping magisteria. We can't hope to argue with a mentality.
All right, just got
we can do just what you're doing now, and that is, we can say, look at this interesting bag of tricks that have evolved. Notice that they're circular, that they're self-sustaining, that they don't have any, that they could be about anything, and then you don't argue with them. You simply point out that these are not valid ways of thinking about anything. Because you could use the very same tricks to sustain something which was manifestly fraudulent. And in fact, what fascinates me is that a lot of the tricks they have their counterparts with con artists. They use the very same forms of non-argument, the very same non sequiturs, and they make, for instance, a virtue out of trust. And as soon as you start exhibiting any suspicion of the con man who's he gets all hurt on you and plays the hurt feelings card and reminds you how wonderful taking it on faith is, and how I mean there aren't any new tricks. These tricks have evolved over.
And you want to look at the production of bogus special effects as well, which is one of the things that completely convicts religion of being fraudulent.
Right.
The belief in the miracle. The same people will say, well, Einstein felt a spiritual force in the universe, when he said the whole point about it is there are no miracles. There are no changes in the natural order. That's the miraculous thing. They're completely cynical about claiming him.
Well, the other thing worth pointing out
was the same brother.
Is that every religious person feels the same criticism of other people's faith that we do as atheists. Yeah. They reject the pseudo-miracles and the pseudo-claims to certainty of others. And they see the confidence tricks in other people's faith. And they see it rather readily. Yep. You know, every Christian knows the Quran can't be the perfect word of the creator of the universe, and anyone who thinks it is hasn't read it closely enough and is just in this hermetically sealed discourse that isn't really being self-critical. And I think we're on very strong, we make a very strong case when we point that out, and point out also that whatever people are experiencing in church or in prayer, no matter how positive, the fact that Buddhists and Hindus and Muslims and Christians are all experiencing it proves that it can't be a matter of the divinity of Jesus or the unique sanctity of the Quran, or because
there's 17 different ways of getting there. Yeah.
By the way, on that a tiny point, it's not. I hope not a digression. It's useful bearing that in mind too when you get, as I did this morning on ABC News, the question, well, wouldn't you say religion did some good in the world and there were good people? You never don't get that argument. But by the way, there's no reason why one shouldn't. You say, well, yes, I have indeed heard it said that Hamas provides social services in Gaza. And I've even heard it said that Louis Farrakhan's group gets young black men in prison off drugs. I don't know if it's true. I'm willing to accept it might be.
Right.
It doesn't alter the fact that the one is a militarized terrorist organization with a fanatical anti-Semitic ideology, and the second is a racist crackpot cult.
Yeah.
And the other, I have no doubt that Scientology gets people off drugs too. But my insistence always with these people is, if you will claim it for one, you must accept it for them all.
And the other move you can make there is,
if you don't, it's flat out dishonest.
You can invent an ideology which, by your mere invention in that moment, is obviously untrue, which would be quite useful if propagated to billions. I mean, you could say, this is my new religion. Teach people to demand that your children study science and math and economics and all of our terrestrial disciplines to the best of their abilities. And if they don't persist in those efforts, they'll be tortured after death by 17 demons. This would be extremely useful, and it would be far more useful than Islam, propagated to billions. And yet, what are the chances that the 17 demons exist? Zero.
There's a slipperiness too, isn't there, about one way of speaking to sophisticated intellectuals and theologians and another way of speaking to congregations and, above all, children. And I think we've all of us been accused of going after the easy targets of the Jerry Falwells of this world and ignoring the sophisticated professors of theology. And I mean, I don't know what you feel about that, but one of the things I feel is that the sophisticated professors of theology will say one thing to each other and to intellectuals generally, but will say something totally different to a congregation. They'll talk about miracles, they'll talk about...
Well, they won't talk to a congregation.
Well, archbishops will.
Yes, but when the sophisticated theologians try to talk to the preachers won't have any of it.
Well, that's true.
I mean, you got to realize that sophisticated theology is like stamp collecting. It's a very specialized thing, and only a few people do it.
And
they take in their own laundry, and they get all excited about some very arcane details, and their own religions pay almost no attention to what they're saying. A little bit of it does, of course, filter in, but it always gets beefed up again for general consumption, because what they say in their writings, at least from my experience, is eye-glazing, mind-twisting, very subtle things which had no particular bearing on life.
Oh, no, I must insist. I must say a good word here for Professor Alistair McGrath, who his attack on Richard said it's not true, as we've always been told, and most Christians believe, that Tertullian said, credo quae absurdum, I believe it because it's ridiculous. No, it turns out, I've checked this now, though I don't know this from McGrath, that in fact Tertullian said the impossibility of it is the thing that makes it the most believable. That's a well distinction, I think. And very useful for training one's mind in the fine question. It's the likelihood, in other words, that it could have been made up,
right,
is diminished by the credibility of it. Who would try and invent something that was that unbelievable? That actually is, I think, a debate perfectly well worth having. What I say to these people is this: you're sending your email or your letter to the wrong address. Everyone says, let's not judge religion by its fundamentalists. All right. Take the Church of England. Two of whose senior leaders recently said that the floods in North Yorkshire were the result of homosexual behaviour Not in North Yorkshire, presumably, probably in London, I think. But
name is a little
one of these, the Bishop of Carlisle, is apparently about to be the next Archbishop of Canterbury. Now, this is extraordinary. This is supposed to be the mild and reflective and thoughtful and rather, troubled church, making fanatical pronouncements. Well, I want to hear what Alistair McGrath is going to write to the Bishop of Carlisle, not to me. Is he going to say, my Lord Bishop, do you not realise what a complete idiot you're making of yourself and of our church? Did he do this? If he did it in private, I'm not impressed. He has to say it in public. Why are they telling me that I will judge the church by the statements of its bishops? And I think I'm allowed to.
Yeah. But the other thing is that, never mind about the academic theologians, bishops and vicars, who will attack us for taking scriptures, or for accusing people of taking scriptures literally. And of course we don't believe the book of Genesis literally. And yet they do preach about what Adam and Eve did, as though they did exist, as though they're somehow, it's a sort of license to talk about things which they know and anybody of any sophistication knows is fiction, and yet they will treat their congregations, their sheep, as though they did exist, as though they were factual, and a huge number of those congregations actually think they did exist.
Can you imagine any one of these preachers saying, as such a topic is introduced, this is a sort of theoretical fiction. It's not true, but it's a very fine metaphor. No, they're just
they kind of, after the fact, imply that that's what they expect you to know.
Yes, but they would never announce it.
Well, there's another point there, is that they never admit how they have come to stop taking it literally. Because you have all these people criticizing us for our crass literalism. We're as fundamentalist as the fundamentalists. And yet, these moderates don't admit how they have come to be moderate. What does moderation consist of? It consists of having lost faith in all of these propositions, or half of them, because of just the hammer blows of science and secular politics.
Of the crass literalism of the critics.
Yeah, religion has lost its mandate on 1,000 questions, and moderates tend to argue that this is somehow a triumph of faith, that faith is somehow self-enlightening, whereas it's been enlightened from the outside. It has been, it has been intruded upon by
On
science.
that point, though, I was wanting to raise myself about our own so-called fundamentalism. There's a cleric in Southwark, the first person I saw attacking you and I in print as being just as fundamentalist as those who blew up the London Underground. Do you remember his name?
I don't remember his name.
Sorry, I don't remember. He's a very senior Anglican cleric in the Diocese of Southwark. I went on the BBC with him, just entre parenthèses, I'll say, when I'd said, how can you call your congregation a flock? Doesn't that say everything about your religion, that you think they're sheep? He said, well, actually, I used to be a pastor in New Guinea. Well, there aren't any sheep. Well, of course, there are a lot of places where there are sheep. Gospel's quite hard to teach, as a result. We found out what the most important animal to the locals was, and I remember very well my local bishop rising to ask the Divine One to behold these swine, his new congregation. But this is the man who deliberately does a thing like that, that's as cynical as you could wish, and as adaptive as the day is long. And he says that we who doubt it are as fundamentalists as people who blow up their fellow citizens on the London Underground. It's unconscionable. Thus, I don't really mind being accused of ridiculing or treating with contempt people like that. I just frankly have no choice. I have the faculty of humour, and some of it has an edge to it. I'm not going to repress that for the sake of politeness.
Would you think that it would be good to make a distinction between the professionals and the amateurs? I share your impatience with the officials of the churches, the people who this is their professional life. It seems to me they know better.
Right.
The congregations don't know better because it's maintained that they should not know better. I do get very anxious about ridiculing the beliefs of the flock because of the way in which they have ceded to their leaders. They've delegated authority to their leaders, and they presume their leaders are going to do it right. So I think in this, who stands up and says the buck stops here? Right. Well, it seems to me it's the preachers themselves, it's the priests, it's the bishops, and we really should hold their feet to the fire. For instance, just take the issue of creationism. If somebody in a fundamentalist church thinks that creationism makes sense because their pastor told them, well, I can understand that and excuse that. We all get a lot of what we take to be true from people that we respect and whom we view as authorities. We don't check everything. But where did the pastor get this idea? And I don't care where he or she is responsible, because their job is to know what they're talking about in a way that the congregation is.
We have to be a little bit careful not to sound condescending when we say that, and in a way it's reflecting the condescension of the preacher.
Yes, because I'll take things that you and Richard say on human and natural sciences, not without wanting to check, but I'm often unable to, but knowing that you are the sort of gentleman who would have checked. If you say, the bishop told me it, so I believe it, you make a fool of yourself, it seems to me, and one is entitled to say so. Just as one is entitled, when dealing with an ordinary racist, to say that his opinions are revolting. He may know no better, but that's not going to save him from my condemnation. And nor should it. And I think exactly it's condescending not to confront people, as it were, one by one, or en masse. So public opinion is often wrong. Mob opinion is almost always wrong. Religious opinion is wrong. Religious opinion is wrong by definition. We can't avoid this. I wanted to intrude the name H.L. Mencken at this point. Mm-hmm. Now, a very justly celebrated American writer. Not particularly to my taste, much too much of a Nietzschean, and what really was once meant by social Darwinists. Right. At one stage, why did he win the tremendous respect of so many people in this country in the 20s and 30s? Because he said the people who believe what the Methodists tell them and what William Jennings Bryan tells them are fools. They're not being fooled; they are fools. They should.
Shame on them for believing these.
Yes, they make themselves undignified and ignorant. And no mincing of words here, and a great admixture of wit and evidence and reasoning. It absolutely works. The most successful anti-religious polemic there's probably ever been in the modern world. In the 20th century, anyway.
I think we just touched upon an issue that we should really highlight, this whole notion of authority, because religious people often argue that science is just a tissue of uncashed checks. You know, we're all relying on authority. How do you know that the cosmological constant is whatever it is? You know, so I think you two are well placed to do this. Differentiate the kind of faith placing in authority that we practice without fear in science and rationality generally, and the kind of faith placing in the preacher or the theologian that we criticize.
Well, what we actually do when we who are not physicists take on trust what physicists say is we have some evidence to suggest that physicists have looked into the matter, that they've done experiments, that they've peer-reviewed their papers, that they've criticized each other, that they've been subjected to massive criticism from their peers in seminars and in lectures and things. And they've come through.
And remember the structure that's there too. It's not just that there's peer review, but it's very important that it's competitive. For instance, when Fermat's last theorem was proved by Andrew Wiles, the reason that those of us who forget it, I'm never going to understand that proof, but the reason that we can be confident that it really is a proof is that
nobody wanted him to get there first.
Every other mathematician who was competent in the world was very well motivated to study that, and believe me, if they begrudge him that this is a proof, it's a proof. Yes. And there's nothing like that.
No, because we're the antithesis. No religious person is ever able to say what Einstein said. If I'm right, the following solar event will occur off the west coast of Africa in, I forget how many years and months from now, and it did, within a very tiny degree of variation. There's never been a prophecy that's been vindicated like that, or anyone willing to place their reputation and their, as it were, their life on the idea that it would be.
I was once asked at a public meeting, don't you think that the mysteriousness of quantum theory is just the same as the mysteriousness of the Trinity or the transubstantiation? And the answer, of course, can be answered in two quotes from Richard Feynman. One, Richard Feynman said, if you think you understand quantum theory, you don't understand quantum theory. He was admitting that it's highly mysterious. But the other thing is that the predictions of quantum theory, experimentally, are verified to the equivalent of predicting the width of North America to the width of one human hair. And so quantum theory is massively supported by accurate predictions, even if you don't understand the mystery of the Copenhagen interpretation or whatever it is. Whereas this mystery of the Trinity doesn't even try to make a prediction, let alone an accurate one.
You know, I don't like
it. Isn't a mystery either.
I don't like the use of the word mystery here.
Yes.
I think there's been a lot of consciousness raising in philosophy about this term, where we have so-called Mysterians, the new Mysterians. These are people who like the term mystery. Noam Chomsky is famously quoted to say, there's two kinds of questions: there's puzzles and mysteries. Puzzles are soluble, mysteries aren't. And first of all, I just don't buy that, but I buy the distinction and say there's nothing about mystery in science. There's puzzles, there's deep puzzles, there's things we don't know, there's things we'll never know, but they aren't systematically incomprehensible to human beings. The glorification of the idea that these things are systematically incomprehensible is, I think, has no place in science.
Which is why I think we should be quite happy to revive traditional terms in our discourse, such as obscurantism and obfuscation, is what they read up. And to point out that these things can make intelligent people act stupidly. John Cornwell has just written another attack on yourself, Richard, and who is an old friend of mine, a very brilliant guy. Wrote one of the best studies of the Catholic Church and fascism that has been published. He's in his review. He says, Professor Dawkins should just look at the shelves of books there are on the Trinity. The library is full with attempts to solve this problem before he's so. But none of the books in those religious libraries solve it either. The whole point is that it remains insoluble and is used to keep people feeling baffled and inferior.
But I want to come back to the thing about mystery in physics, because isn't it possible that our evolved brains, because we evolved in what I call middle world, where we never have to cope with either the very small or the cosmologically very large, we may never actually have an intuitive feel for what's going on in quantum mechanics, but we can still test its predictions. We can still actually do the mathematics and do the physics to actually test the predictions, because anybody can read the dials on a